This is Generation Space, the official podcast of Air Force Space Command. In this episode, we're talking to two of our wingmen who launch satellites for a living. Start the countdown, because this podcast is out to launch.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? I'm Master Sergeant Dave Sanlitri, and this is another episode of Generation Space. We're coming to you out of Los Angeles Air Force Base, home to Space and Missile Systems Center. Today, we have a great podcast. We're going to talk STP-2. We're going to talk some launch, and I have two awesome guests. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Sir, if you want to maybe introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you do here.
Sure. I'm Dr. Walt Lauderdale. I run the Falcon Division here in the Launch Enterprise Directorate here at SMC. And what we do, we're responsible for the launches with SpaceX on a number of very fantastic missions. One of the ones we get to do is STP-2, as you mentioned. Right, yeah. It's actually with a sister division out of Albuquerque, so it's somewhat unique. They handle a lot of the smaller launches and experimental launches, and this is something they had done for us. And I get the privilege of being the mission director for that launch, which is coming up here in just a couple of weeks. But it's going to be an exciting time, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to share what we do.
That's awesome. I'm looking forward to talking about that in a little bit. And LT, if you want to introduce yourself, sir.
Yeah, so I'm a structures engineer on the Delta IV launch vehicle.
So you have a first name and you have a last name too.
I do have a last name. My first name is Lieutenant Rob Larue. Thanks for catching that. So I'm a structures engineer on the Delta IV launch vehicle. Basically, if you think about a rocket, the big fiery thing on the bottom that makes a lot of noise is the engine. And if you think about Newton's second law, F equals ma, all that thrust that's using to get the rocket off the ground also goes back into the vehicle. So you need a lot of components, whether they're metal or composite, just like on a building, to keep it standing. And it's a similar concept, just more aerospacey. So I'm focused on that area.
That's awesome. Is this your first Air Force assignment? Second?
More or less. My first assignment, I went to ROTC for undergrad, and then after commissioning, I went to the Air Force Institute of Technology. So that was actually my first assignment where I got a master's degree. And then, but this is my first, I'd call it my first real job in the Air Force. So I kind of look at it as my first assignment.
Been a fun ride so far, huh?
Yeah, it's been pretty awesome.
That's great. That's great. So, Doctor, I understand there's some fun stuff going on in, we know there's a lot of fun stuff going on in space, but with launch, this is a fun, next 30, 40 days going on? What's going on?
Well, absolutely. For the launch directorate, we've got a wonderful collection of missions happening over here in June and July. The first one, as we talked to, coming up here in just under 2 weeks, on the evening of the 24th of June, we've got the STP-2 launch with a Falcon Heavy. And speaking of Falcon Heavy,
did you bring?
I did.
Yeah.
Hey, we had to make sure you guys see what a Heavy looks like. So that's going to be the start of this exciting period in June and July.
Look at that.
Following a couple days later on Atlas, we're launching the AEHF-5 communication satellite for a sister directorate here at Space and Missile Systems Center for communications for our military. And then a few days after that, that sister division down in Albuquerque is supporting NASA with an ascent abort test for their Orion capsule. That's going to be used on the Space Launch System for NASA to take men back to the moon. So that's really exciting. But you got to make sure you can protect those astronauts if something happens during the ascent. So our other division is helping by running a test for that by providing the solid stage from a retired ICBM in order to provide that. And then capping it all off, near the end of July, we're launching the second GPS-3 satellite.
Right.
We all know what GPS is.
Big
so
fan.
we're launching that second GPS-3, launching it on the last single-core Delta IV vehicle. And that's the one that Rob had talked about and that he's going to be working on. As a matter of fact, we brought along another companion, so we'll just kind of park that one right up here. And we'll just put that right there.
That's awesome.
And we'll see what we got right here. And so these are the two things that we have going on here, and it's going to be a fantastic time, kind of bookending a lot of activity that we're going to be doing together here over the next 6 weeks.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So there's a lot going on here. Holy cow, what a busy summer, to say the least. Does that look good over there? Can everyone see that okay? All right, cool. Want to make sure it's not in the way. We wouldn't want to block any of these faces right here, even though I say I have a face for radio. So maybe if it did block my face, that'd be okay, That's awesome. So that's exciting stuff. One of the things you talked about with the Orion, for example, is the fact that we're finally bringing, hopefully, space flight, launching out of America, our astronauts out of America. So that's so awesome to hear that. That's something that we're getting, it sounds like a couple of steps closer to doing.
Right, yeah, and it's a wonderful opportunity that demonstrates what this directorate and what the Air Force can do to support our sister agencies in helping accomplish their mission. So we're happy to be able to do that.
And it's so important too. It's not like one of those things. Yeah, we want to have it. Hopefully they'll never use it. But we saw Colonel Haig had to abort out of his launch, and that's a very real system that needs to be. It's like insurance. You don't want to use it. You don't want to have to use it, but when you need to, you're glad it's there.
Yep. Yep.
So LT, talk to me a little bit. What are you most excited about? What's going on in your world? What are you amped up about right now?
So there's a lot of exciting things going on in launch. Something that's exciting for me is beginning to work on the Delta launch vehicle. It's a launch vehicle that has been, kind of doing a lot of the workforce launching missions for the Air Force over the last 15 years or so, and now it's ramping down. The heavies are going to keep flying for a while, but I'm really excited to be able to kind of be here at the tail end of it and kind of seeing some of these, Delta launch vehicles out on their way out and make sure that they're successful. It's also just, I'm not as directly involved with it, but it's also exciting to see a lot of the competition that's new in the market and see, it's an exciting future for launch. No matter how it pans out, it's going to be a very dynamic, interesting environment, I think.
Well, you mentioned a lot of competition. And sir, you've been around a day or two. I'm going to say, for those who don't know, Dr. Lauderdale here, retired Air Force. He spent a couple of days in the Air Force, to say the least. And the LT has literally spent a couple of days in the Air Force. Just kidding, sir. But it seems like with space, especially with launch, maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, the narrative was a little more quiet. But now I can go anywhere. I can go to any pub in LA or in Colorado Springs, where we're from, and millennials, people who have nothing to do with space know about space. They could talk to you about ULA, SpaceX, Blue Origin, you name it. They could talk about all of them. It seems like it's exciting again. What have you seen? I mean, you've seen a lot. You've seen it, the heyday. You've kind of seen it calm down a little bit, and now I feel like we're rolling at pretty fast speeds right now.
Well, it's been quite the role. I mean, the evolution of our directorate here in launch. There have been prior directors in launch. We go back 20 years where we had a string of failures. There were a number of things that came about in terms of how we fix that and make sure we don't have failures again. And that was actually the genesis of a lot of what we do in the launch directorate. That was at right at the beginning of what was then the Evolved Expendable Launch Vehicle Program, EELV, now been renamed National Security Space Launch Program, to recognize that we're dealing with potential for reusable systems like what SpaceX is doing, what Blue Origin is doing with their New Glenn, looking ahead to that. How do we make sure that we have that available for the future? But a lot of what we do, a lot of what Rob does day to day as an RE is making sure that that rocket works. And a lot of the foundation for the processes that we use to make sure that the rocket can deliver those spacecraft safely to orbit came out of like a phoenix rising from, at the end, looking at how we look at the launch vehicle, how we work with the contractor to make sure that it works and delivers that payload safely to orbit. It had its genesis there with that string of failures. And we've been fortunate enough that we've had a string of successes that's quite enviable, but we always keep our eye on the ball because you're only one mission away from potentially having a bad day. But we've seen that ebb and flow, and that's part of what we want to hand off to the next generation, is to remember what we've learned and continue that practice and teach them and then turn them loose and make sure that we continue it for all the new vehicles that are coming down the line.
Right. Well, it's that old cliche. It's like, you learn more from failure sometimes than success. But even with failure, it's good. It seems like there's been lessons learned that you're applying and he's learning from today. Is that pretty kind of accurate, I guess?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's when you have as you said, when you have a string of successes, it makes it look easy. Let me tell you, it is not easy. You talk to anybody there, where sometimes people look and think it's easy. There was a period of time where people weren't really following launch. It's been kind of, as you said, it's been kind of re-energized now with all the entrance of new players. You're getting the small launch things. They're launching like the Electron out of New Zealand, and soon to be out of the U.S. A lot of new companies are coming into play, and it's becoming more affordable. So now people are paying attention. They're saying, wow, this is cool.
This is real.
This is awesome. Hey, and it's in the news, and people are paying attention to it. But yeah, we have to take those things and make sure people understand that it's not easy. one of the things I think that's fascinating, for example, you look at SpaceX, one of the things that they do, they've got cameras all over that rocket.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's always video.
Yeah,
one of the
sure
neat
are.
things, for example, with the second stage, when it gets on orbit and it stops firing and it's in a coast phase, they have a camera inside the liquid oxygen tank, and you see these globs of liquid oxygen just floating around, sort of like people on the vomit comet, the thing that you can do weightlessness in the aircraft. And you see those blobs going by, but you go, well, that looks pretty cool. But the engineering behind it is that in order for it to continue working, I got to get all those blobs back down to the end of the tank so they can get back to the engine. And so you got to make sure you do all the physics, you got to do all the engineering right, otherwise it won't work. And so having a chance to illustrate that and then be able to teach the kids in high school and in college and saying, there's more to it. Right. And so I think the cameras and stuff like that, plus being able to have all that dialogue, is an opportunity for us to get people really excited about what we do, and that it's not simple. But when you pay attention and you focus on the details, our goal is to make it look simple, but it really isn't.
No, I mean, rocket science. I mean, it's there's a little phrase that goes along with it. But well, let me ask you this: what are you most excited about right now? What is the thing that is just driving your passion right now? Because when I look at you, you kind of light up, you get excited. What are you most excited about right now?
Well, you kind of talk about, we're in a transition with a number of different launch providers coming up with new vehicles. From our directorate standpoint, we're going through this transition. As Rob said, we're flying out the last of the single stick deltas right here, and we only have the heavies left. Well, we still have to deliver payloads to orbit to serve our nation's warfighters across the board and intelligence community. And so getting through this transition and making sure we do it properly, that's what excites me. And there's so many things going on right now that are really fun, fascinating. You get to learn, you get to see what industry is able to bring to bear to try to design these new rockets, and to be able to journey with them and to do our job to evaluate with them to make sure that they deliver our payload safely. I mean, that's a lot of fun. It gets me excited. I mean, and they pay me to play with rockets. Okay,
life's good.
It's like Peter Pan. I haven't grown up yet. It's just wonderful.
That's awesome. Well, let me ask you this: when it comes to STP2, that's later this month. What are you hoping to see? What are you most excited about with that? What's the significance of STP2? Well,
with STP2, this is a number of firsts with this particular launch. It's the first DoD use of a Falcon Heavy. We put it on contract. It was actually the EELV program. We paid for the rocket so that we'd have an opportunity to get early insight into the Falcon Heavy. It went under contract about 6-7 years ago. Due to the timing and development, of course, it hasn't launched yet. But we've taken advantage of working with SpaceX to understand how can we get more insight as to where SpaceX is now and where they're going. So, for example, another first for this is we're going to be doing previously flown hardware. So on this rocket, the two strap-ons were flown on their last Falcon Heavy in April, the Arabsat 6 mission, and we're using them again. So we get to learn about how to look at previously flown hardware. What does SpaceX do with it? How does that affect our job? And then we're going to be able to do this again. And SpaceX is again going to try to recover all the cores. 2 back on land at Cape Canaveral, another one out on a drone ship. So, I mean, that's kind of exciting, let alone the science missions that we're launching up here.
Yeah, and the thing, when you think about all the payloads and everything, you go on the SpaceX website and you look at, everything that what's going to be accomplished right here. It's quite exciting when you think about, what this means. LT, you've been a little quiet. So, sorry, not going to let that go on much longer. Let me ask you this. So you're first lieutenant. How old are you?
I am 26 years old.
So when we think about generation space, 26 years old, and I think about what I was doing at 26 years old, what my friends were doing at 26 years old, I think about I wonder what your peers are doing, because 26 years old, to be able to work on something like this, the opportunity to work on something like this. I mean, do you think about that? Do you get?
Yeah, I feel really lucky. Like growing. One of my bosses at work mentioned that this is a TV job, and I kind of agree with him, because it's like you watch like movies from the Apollo era and you see people that are like on console, supporting and saying go for a launch, and you're like, oh, those are made up people that do that. Like real people don't have that job, but I actually get to do that for a living and feel extraordinarily lucky. I kind of found my way into this position. I didn't necessarily know that there was stuff like this even available in the Air Force when I originally looked into it. Like when I first started up in ROTC, I actually wanted to be a pilot, like a lot of people that go into the Air Force. And I as I got farther along in my engineering classes, I realized that I really enjoyed engineering and that science and technology really excited me. So then I started kind of looking towards other opportunities that I could pursue that within the Air Force. So I kind of got here in a roundabout way. But there's definitely a lot of exciting things, a lot of exciting opportunities like my job that for people who are interested in a STEM career, the Air Force is definitely a viable option, and there's a lot of exciting things to work on.
Yeah, getting to work on multi-million, billion-dollar projects as a 26-year-old. I mean, that what an opportunity.
Yeah.
What an opportunity. When you talk to your family, your folks, or whoever, what's the thing you tell them most? Like, what's the thing that when you try to explain to them what you do here, how do you make this relatable to them?
So the way that I would describe my job is mission success. My job is basically to make sure that all of the hardware on the rocket is ready when the clock goes to 0 and the engine's lit and it's moving off the pad. Basically making sure that when that happens, the mission's going to be successcul.
Have you seen a success? Have you seen a launch yet? Have you got to go?
Yes,
out yet?
I've had the opportunity to do a few. We were involved in the Parker Solar Probe mission, actually, even though it's not a DoD launch. We were still there helping out because NASA's not as familiar with the Delta family of launch vehicles. And then first national security launch for me was L-71. It was an NRO satellite. It's an intelligence bird that we launched out of Vandenberg. And then my most recent launch was the WGS launch out of Cape Canaveral a few months ago. So I've got to do it a few times now.
And you're going to be able to go see GPS-3?
Yes. That's going to be exciting because, as Dr. Lauderdale mentioned, it's the last single stick Delta. So what I mean by that is that there's a configuration of the Delta that looks exactly like the Falcon Heavy. It's got a single booster with 2 strap-on boosters to it, but there's also this configuration here that's been flying for a while, and this is going to be the last one of those. So it's kind of a retirement of that family of launch vehicles. It's pretty exciting.
Some bookends going on.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question, sir. A part of your, a secondary part of your job, I feel like, is probably mentorship a little bit. Grooming that next your replacement. Do you think about that sometimes? Does it think about, all right, where this culture was, where this enterprise was when you're, a first lieutenant or, just kind of young to space, and where you hope it is when it gets time for you to hang it up and your next replacement to get there. Do you ever think about that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there have been opportunities for me to potentially move a little further up and do a different job. But to be honest, and I've told many people this, I didn't want to get too far away where I didn't have a chance to interact with the new lieutenants and captains or anybody who's new to our part of the business, because I feel very strongly that passing that along and that whole mindset and understanding, that's how you pay it forward. That's how you make sure that whatever we've learned and how we've made successful with the Air Force launch the last 20 years, in order to keep it going for the next 20 years, it ain't going to be me. It's going to be people like Rob who are going to come back and keep making that going. So to me, that's another really fun part of the job, is to share what I've experienced, what we focused on, why it's important to share it with the next generation, right. Because that's how we do things. That's how you make sure that it continues, and I find that very satisfying.
What would you say to, let's say a 5th grader or 6th grader who's kind of, they're starting to think about their future and what that looks like, and they're maybe like, I used to want to be a fireman, but maybe I want to do something a little bit different. What would you say to them?
Well, I have a couple of nieces. I actually went in and talked at their class. We talked about the rocket stuff, and the biggest thing is to just tell them how fascinating it is. Like the whole thing with the liquid oxygen globe and stuff, saying, "Isn't that cool? Yeah. Isn't that cool? Look at this. Look at this. This is really cool stuff." And showing them things that they might not. That it's not science fiction. It's real, and you can have a part of it. Isn't this neat? And this get them really excited about all the things that they can discover. And it's that curiosity, firing on that curiosity, and say, always ask questions, be curious, because kids always are. They're always asking questions. You just want to get them asking questions about this stuff versus something else. And you do that by exposing them to the neat stuff that's out there and just saying, this is real. This is not, this is not a video game. Yeah. This is real.
That's awesome. One of the things we commonly hear, like photographers who have been around, creatives in the business is they might be in the 50, 60 years old, and they are just still curious about life. Mm-hmm. And they say, I asked one of them, how do you keep that going? He says, your brain's a muscle. You need to flex that thing, exercise it, work it out every day, and that's called being curious. So that's really cool to hear you kind of talk about that. We're going to start to wrap it up a little bit. So I know we've talked about a lot, but sir, I'll start with you. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you maybe you want to mention, or something that we have talked about that it's on your heart, you just want to foot stomp it again?
Well, just come back to what we started with in terms of what we're doing here for Air Force launch. We have an exciting next 6 weeks going through 4 different kinds of missions, spanning from some research and experimental satellites, even including on STP-2. We've got some international cooperation. There's 6 satellites that are coming from Taiwan that we're working with that are going to provide some good weather data. You can find more information on that website. But it's the one thing that I find neat about working launch is that we have so many different customers, and it gives us a chance to understand and really appreciate that. I mean, the rocket is just the truck. It's the transportation mechanism. And we get a chance to support all these different mission areas. And that's one of the things that really excites me. And we're really excited in launch to be able to support all our different customers. And we get a chance to do quite a variety over the next 6 weeks.
Hey, if my Apple weather app is now more updated and more accurate because of this, I appreciate it. I can make more accurate golf tee times now. LT, how about you? Is there anything that we haven't mentioned that you may want to throw out there, or something we have mentioned maybe just want to stomp again?
Just kind of like Dr. Lauderdale mentioned, the Air Force has a lot of really exquisite, really unique space capabilities that are extremely important for not just defense but the world. And I think the work that we do to make sure that those satellites get up into orbit and are able to accomplish their mission it's very rewarding for me, and I feel extremely lucky that the Air Force has given me this responsibility and trusted me to do that job. So I'm very thankful for that. And if anything that we launch can help our fighters overseas have an easier time of getting their job done, that's a success in my book. So.
Well said. Well said. He's been trained well. So I'm going to throw you both a curveball. It's a question I end just about every interview with, and I never did this with podcasts, but I'm starting to do it now. And so I'll start with you, LT. Give you a second to think about it.
Sure.
What do you live your life by? What do you have a slogan, a phrase, a parable, something that says this is who I am?
Yeah, I would say something I try to live by is candor. So honesty, integrity. I think that's kind of like a cheesy thing to say, but that's something that I think is extremely important. I know sometimes people in my life that have talked to me sometimes think I'm rude or mean, and that's not my intent. It's because I think being true to yourself and being honest to other people about who you are is extremely important. So there's many principles in my life, but I would say honesty is kind of the main one that guides everything I do.
That's awesome. Well said. So you had a second to think about it. So you got to come out swinging now.
No. So the one thing that I try to do is I try to every now and then step back and then just be wowed by what's around us. Just step back and say, wow. There's so many things that are yet to be discovered that you can just have that wow moment, and you can apply that every day of your life, whatever you do. And I try to bring that into work. So when, like I said, I get to play with rockets. That's a wow moment, and I try to live that every day.
Kind of keeping that, like a childlike wonder.
Yes.
That's awesome. That's great. Well, I hope you both, enjoyed this. I hope it wasn't too bad. And thank you both for taking time out of your day. I know you're busy and life's busy and work's busy right now, but having the chance to sit down and talk to you both was, this was a joy. So I hope it wasn't too bad.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
It was great.
Great. Well, that's it for this episode of Generation Space. Thanks for joining us here from LA Air Force Base, and we look forward to you joining us next time. Thanks.
Next time on Generation Space, we'll meet more of the amazing airmen who make it happen at the Space and Missile Systems Center. We truly appreciate you taking the time to join us. As always, your feedback is a huge help, so please comment and let us know how we're doing and how we can answer all of your aft space questions. Generation Space is a production of Air Force Space Command Public Affairs. The Generation Space theme is by First Lieutenant Tyler Whiting. Our audio engineer is Jacob Mosolf. Our video producers are Staff Sergeant J.T. Armstrong and Dave Grimm, and our executive producer is Robert Buckingham. For more info on Air Force Space Command, visit our website at www.afspc.af.mil. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Thanks for supporting the airmen who aim higher. They used to say the sky's the limit, but for us in space, there is no limit.